Hi everyone, Mr. Silbaugh here, and this is my take on Unit 9, Lesson 4. So, in review from last time, we talked about GUI editors, and they have a lot of the same features and tools as HTML, and they make it easier to create some web pages. You also need to remember that you consider users who may have a disability when you're designing your website using a GUI editor, and even if you yourself have a disability, you're able to use the GUI editor. So the focus of this lesson is going to be talking about previewing pages and validating your code. Whenever you code and create a web page or a website with the GUI editor, you always want to make sure that you are previewing it and making sure that it looks the way that you want it to look. So you've seen in the past lessons that you need to review your pages while working with the GUI editor. I hinted at it in some of the past lessons in this unit. Keep in mind that even though a GUI editor may not be the greatest, some of them are really good. Some of them have some things that don't necessarily do well with HTML code. But in general, you can still preview the pages. Like, it will allow you to pick which web browser you want to view it in, and it will open it up in that web browser so you get an idea of how it will look. You'll also be able to view the code and see the behind the scenes like normal. And you can also typically validate using like the W3C validator that I've showed you in the past. You can always choose what browser you want to view it in. That way, if you want to test it in all browsers, you have that option. Or if you're using a specific browser for like a company, then you can test it in just that specific browser. The doc type declaration. The text mentions this, but I feel like it's not really something that it's important, but at the same time, we've gone over it several times before. What it essentially is saying is that when you do pick the doc type, you look in your validator. The validator will evaluate the code based upon which declaration you use. So, example that the text gives is, say you wrote your code in 4.01 and then you decide to make the jump to 5, and you think, oh, I'm just going to go ahead and change the doc type declaration at the beginning, and think, oh, that'll be fine, that'll work, I can always go back and fix any code. Well, here's the thing: if you're working with a partner, they may grab that code and validate it because it looks like you put it in 5, and it will start coming up that it can't validate it. So please be careful. Essentially, you want to keep track of what declaration you use to make sure that the code that you use is up to that state. Now, lastly, what this is going to talk about is validating. When you are validating your HTML code, you need to consider that most GUI editors do have their own set of validators or tools to help you find the validators. And some of them actually do have features to ensure that there's accessibility options available to you. In conclusion, make sure that you always validate if you have a GUI editor, and you want to make sure your code matches the correct standard you're using, and you want to make sure that you preview your code using a GUI editor. Essentially, the biggest takeaway from this lesson is that if you do use a GUI editor to create your web pages, you want to make sure that it will display properly in whatever web browser you choose. And you also want to make sure that it's going to validate and not have any errors, because it's the one thing you really don't want to happen is you spend all this time in a GUI editor making your web page or website, and then you go and try and publish it to the web and it won't show up because the code is off. Okay, all right, that's going to do it for this lesson.